So good morning. My name is Andy Hall, and I'm the director of the Army Cyber Institute. And glad that we have everyone here together. Give you a chance to talk a little bit about what the Army Cyber Institute is and what we're doing, and illustrate our connection to all of you in the community. So I have one extremely busy slide to start out with that talks about what our strategy is within the Army Cyber Institute, which the key things are the gold, the gray, and then the black line, which have illustrate our 3 lines of effort. The top one being advancing the body of knowledge, the second one being impactful partnerships, and the last one being leader development. And so we'll talk a little bit about each one of those, but the key thing that we are looking to do at the Army Cyber Institute is to be an opportunity or a place where some thinking can get done for the Army. The Chief of Staff of the Army and the previous Secretary of the Army set us up and established a think tank at West Point to have somebody that would be able to think about the questions that they had that were keeping them up at night. And so in 2012, it was the Army Cyber Command, commanded by General Hernandez, who was interested, along with General Odierno, setting up something at West Point, and they established in 2012 the beginnings of the Army Cyber Institute, which then, as you know, as we've gone along, since then, we've come up with the Cyber Center of Excellence down at Fort Gordon. We've added DAMO CY, where we have an entire staff section on the Army staff, and the Army community of cyber has continued to grow. So what we have at West Point is a mixture of academics and military professionals. We have 70 authorizations at West Point. Of them, 30 are military, and then we've got 40 that are going to be civilian authorizations. We have some that are a part of our great government community, which are the GS employees like we're all used to run our budgets and take a look at how we interface with our property book and all of the activities we have to do to keep the lights on. But then we also have members of our Title X faculty, which are civilians. And so here you see a little bit of some of the areas where we have our fellows. And so the fellows are PhD researchers that are members of the faculty of West Point. And so I have people teaching in 8 of the 13 departments at West Point. So we teach in the traditional ones you would expect. We're in computer science, electrical engineering, mathematics, systems engineering. We also teach in the English department, teaching in philosophy and cyber ethics. We also teach in the law department, where you're teaching about the law of armed conflict and how cyber works into international law. So we are currently teaching in 8 of the 13 departments. We'll be in 9 of the 13 next year, as we've got someone in grad school right now studying robotics that's going to be working the robotics linkage to our mechanical engineering department. Or it's civil mechanical engineering department. You see on the green where it talks about our military specialties. In addition to the academic specialties, the military that we have, our 30 military, come from a variety of military specialties. We have what used to be known as the pillars of I.O. represented. We've got information operations officers, we've got electronic warfare officers, we've got the cyber officers, so we're covering all of the different efforts that are working within that information operations and the kinetic, non-kinetic effects type group. But we also have the folks that are working in operations research that work with data. We've got our simulation professionals that are working on how we can simulate cyber both at the high resolution level and then low resolution as a part of our systems engineering department. And then we also have a public affairs officer that is working how we get that cyber command messaging out. So even though we've got 30 military, and you might say, well, we've got 30, it must be 30 cyber officers, we actually have only 12 cyber specialists in the Army Cyber Institute, and the rest are all the various specialties that are all part of our multifunctional team. So what we're working on, one of the things that we said was partnerships, and partnerships are key to what we're placed to do. We are at West Point, where we have 70 people in the Army Cyber Institute working to leverage the 500 faculty members that are a part of West Point. So our first leverage is to use all of the faculty members that we have at West Point. We end up doing research with the faculty members, such as the head of the law department, who's currently on operational experience at the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in NATO, that's in Tallinn, Estonia. So even though he's not a member of the ACI, Colonel Wallace is doing research in the cyber domain, working in Estonia on behalf of the Army cyber community. And so that's part of what we work on with partnerships to get the rest of the West Point community to facilitate them doing research in this domain. We also are trying to find ways that we can work the things that are important to the community, but also are relevant to the position we are at West Point. So we do a lot of work with New York City, and so we work with the municipal government in New York City, with the first responders, and have had opportunities to work with them and try to figure out how to better do communication between the cyber community and our teammates in New York, and then are able to bring in the other teammates from the 780th and others in the cyber community to help bring them together with the folks that we have in New York. So we start to make connections and then bring the connections back to the community, keep expanding. And then we also are working, our partnership efforts are very strong with the academic community to try to ensure that we have a place where academics can do research. We have a lot of fundamental questions that need to be answered in the cyber community, and by creating a group of scholars that are interested in those, we become, again, much bigger than just the Army community, or much bigger than our community at West Point. So, right, we work with scholars in Columbia, which is expected. They're one of our New York City neighbors. But we also are working with Carnegie Mellon. We work with Arizona State University. We end up working with our groups that are across the nation that are looking for publishing opportunities. And so one of the things that we have is we have a journal, which then lets that partnership go out. We also have a conference that we do with Saikhan, which gives the members of the community a place to speak. So we're working with creating that community as a part of our academic outreach. So as far as the research efforts, we are trying to do research that's going to advance the cyber community, but we're trying to look at questions that are beyond those of today, to try to look forward about 10 years, to try to look at what we need to do with in the cyber arena. We understand that there are a lot of problems today that we're working on, and different organizations within the Army enterprise have the responsibility for highlighting those solutions. So we're all familiar with the .mil-PF process of the Army, and the Army has given the responsibilities for that to the Cyber Center of Excellence down at Fort Gordon. Originally, those responsibilities were all under our cyber, and as we've grown, we've moved that responsibility down to Fort Gordon. It gives a focal point for the Army's efforts with regards to doctrine and interfacing with everything that is done at TRADOC. At the same time, we've got the Army Cyber Command, which focuses on operations. And they're focusing on operations for cyber, but also focusing on what we're doing, integrating into our brigade combat teams. And so we will assist them in that kind of work as well, but we're not the lead for cyber operations. And at the same time, we've got some interesting talent in some of our young military professionals that gives an opportunity to do some really cool projects. So at AUSA previously, we had an incident with the cyber rifle was something that we had to show General Milley. And the real story of the cyber rifle is not the story of creating a anti-UAV type weapon. It was about trying to solve a very quick problem with a few captains. And so a group of captains were working with Raspberry Pis and Yagi antennas, and they were trying to open Bluetooth locks across the Hudson. So they were shooting across the Hudson and trying to figure out how they could open this little block that they had put on top of their car on the other side in one of the overlooks. And so when General Cardone saw that, he said, well, you should take a look at hacking drones. And so like, okay, so they go back to the garage and they recode up their Raspberry Pis, and they find a way to work on a drone. And so we're trying to highlight that the young captains and the soldiers that we have in the field, if people are concerned about who's going to solve these cyber problems, we have a lot of ingenuity in the field, and we have to give them just some time to work on the problems, and we'll get them. So that's the real success of what we're doing is really our people. The other thing that we talked about was creating a community, and we've got the Cyber Defense Review, which you see the banner is on the bottom left, and on the bottom right we've got our Saikhan conference, which both of those are designed to create community. And above that, we've got one of our electronic warfare professionals out in the field with cadet summer training. So the background of what he's working on there is we've got the cadets that are going to be doing a raid lane, and we've got a mount site that's at West Point, and the cadets have the opportunity to do their planning. And so we worked with Behavioral Sciences and Leadership Department to come up with a plan for what would be the different ways that people might interface with planning and information and with our environment. So we had 3 groups of cadets, and one set of the cadets had a map. Familiar with maps? They're flat, and they tell you basically where you're going to go. And anyone that's done any work in a mountain environment knows that the little marks on the map that show where the buildings are don't give you a whole lot of information. But there was one group that got a map, because that's the way we always do things. So the next group had the map, and we added on some virtual reality goggles. And so these virtual reality goggles in the objective rally point allowed the cadets to walk through the town before they were going to assault it. And so in the scenario, there was a time when this town was friendly, and we had mapped it out at that point, which was in the wintertime, and now in the summer it was no longer friendly. So we had flown drones and gotten good 360-degree coverage for our virtual reality goggles, and so that was all kind of winter. So it looked like it was a few months before. There was nothing on the trees, but the cadets could put on the goggles, and as you turn, you would see the different parts of the. And as they would kind of walk, you don't really walk with them, but you would say, "I'm walking," and push the button, and you'd go forward, and you could walk through the town. And so the behavioral science and leadership team was able to say, okay, how do our young people react to having a map plus having virtual reality before they went through the attack? And so then the third thing that we did was here, we had a Wi-Fi camera network inside the town. And so we had an exploit where they could hack in to take control of the Wi-Fi cameras. And so then the cadets are able to ask the operator to pan the camera left and right, and so they're turning the cameras inside the town and are actually able to look at where the machine gunner has the emplacement within the town. So they could figure out which of the rooms were the ones that might be of the greatest interest to them. And so we had some relatively simple techniques of trying to figure out how we could get cyber in, and looking at a minor hack of a wireless network, something that we've also done at the National Training Center when the 780th has gone out there and augmented the National Training Center. We've been able to hack in and take over the wireless networks. So that we were doing those same things with West Point and leveraging the behavioral sciences department to try to look and study how the cadets process the different kinds of information, how it helped them to have the different layers of information. Because as you can imagine in any good experiment, some cadets got a map, but some cadets got all 3. And so to see how they, if there was any overload, if they were able to ask the right kind of questions to get the right answers out of the different tools that they had. Oh, it looks like I've been clicking, but that's just one, and that's great. We'll go on to to Jack Voltaic also. So Jack Voltaic was a multi-sector exercise that we did with New York City. The name came from one of my, I have a CW3, Judy Escabel, who in all the time that she had been at NSA had always suggested Jack Voltaic as a name, and every operation that she had suggested it for, it hadn't gotten picked up. So finally we were working something at a multi-sector exercise she was working on, and so she got to name it, and so we've called it Jack Voltaic. It's kind of a good name because of the kind of the voltaic kind of gives you the idea of electricity, but we worked with a partner in this group, which was a city. And the interesting thing about Citi is, as a global company, they've got a huge simulation center and a place where they do what we would consider wargaming. And so it's just outside of New York City, and it was able to be a place that we could host this event together with them. But then they also, being in New York City, have good relationships with our different service providers, and we worked with them to get everyone from the Port Authority to the police to the fire department to get those municipal government individuals to be able to come. And we also worked with what we consider the commercial providers, Verizon, AT&T, the ones that you would expect to be a part of any kind of a cyber event that was going to happen in New York City. And so as we developed it, we spent 8 months doing the planning phase, where we brought in the professionals from the cybersecurity groups in each one of these organizations and worked to develop a scenario that they thought would be realistic and worth experimenting on. So it wasn't something that we, with Citi, just came up and unilaterally decided, but we actually worked through for 8 months to come up with what we were going to be doing. So the 25 organizations, 137 participants when it was all said and done, with we had the red team, which was great, gives the cadets a chance to hack in. We had the blue team, which was the cyber professionals from these different organizations. We also had a tabletop exercise to allow the executives to work through some of the issues that would come up. For many of the cyber professionals, it was an opportunity to meet somebody whose name and phone number were on a sticky note in their cubicle, but they had never actually met. And there were some things that came out of the exercise where they realized that some of Group A's alternate line of communication was Group B's primary, and so as they were shifting onto different networks, that they were actually jumping on each other. And so one of these cases was with the 9/11 system and with the phone system, and they were actually able to make a substantial change to the way AT&T ran the 9/11 system as a result of the exercise, which was pretty exciting. The overall reason why we have been running these Jack Voltaic exercises is really two. One is a proof of concept, so that we can create a event that would then be able to be run by others. So once we ran this, then the governor of New York was very interested, and we've had meetings with the governor of New York so they can set up events like this to run throughout their different cities and then come together on state response headquartered out of Albany. The other thing that we're doing is trying to set the stage for when our National Mission Force is going to have to operate off Doden. And so this is all about working towards an understanding between the military, the Title 10 and Title 32 forces, and how we'd be able to work together when we would have to actually support one another in a war-type environment. So another event that I'd like to highlight is Threatcasting. And so one of the things that General Odierno originally tasked us to do was try to prevent strategic surprise. And so Threatcasting is a structured way of thinking about the threats that we're going to have in the future. So we've paired with Arizona State University and with Brian David Johnson, who is on staff there, who is a futurist. And he's worked at Intel before when they were working on designing chips. And the chip production pipeline is 10 years. And so when you start the pipeline on a semiconductor, you want to make sure that what comes out the other end of your 10-year development is going to meet the needs of the computers that are going to be operating at that time. So they've been using futurecasting for a number of years to try to find a way to predict 10 years in the future. So we took the lessons learned from futurecasting, switched them over to threatcasting, and we're working with Arizona State University to identify the threats that we'll have to our community 10 years in the future. So we did a threatcasting event at West Point and got some results out of that, went out to Arizona State University, did a second iteration, and just finished the third iteration at George Washington University here in DC the other day. Each one of these is an opportunity to find a potential future and some of the flags that would happen on the way to that potential future, to look at some of the things we need to consider with regard to weaponized AI or robotics or the ways that data is going to be used in the future. And so I talked about the Cyber Defense Review. The Cyber Defense Review is our journal at West Point. We have a quarterly journal, which is an opportunity to have information that is presented for senior leaders within industry and in the military. We have senior leader commentary. Then we have a portion of the journal which is peer-reviewed, an opportunity for scholars to have their work peer-reviewed and to be published as a part of the Global Commons. And then we've also got book reviews, and the book reviews are great to give the cadets an opportunity to write. So we work with the cadets to come up with book reviews and illustrate to the community some of the things that are interesting that's going on. So this, starting with the new year in 2018, this will be in JSTOR, which is one of the library methods of distributing. So although we have it on the website, starting next year it'll be in all the libraries that have the JSTOR system, which is designed to sharing and preserving the academic contribution. And then the last thing that I'll speak to is Saikhan, which is our conference, which is the 7th and 8th of November, which is here in the Ronald Reagan Building down in Washington, D.C. And that is the second part of the creating a community that we're doing. This partnership is a partnership with the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn, Estonia. So the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence is a NATO-accredited group that runs Saikhan in Estonia. They've been running it for the last 9 to 10 years, in the sense that the next conference, which will be in Tallinn in the spring, will be the 10th iteration of their conference. And as a partner with them, we did the Saikhan in the United States last year for the first time, and we'll iterate it for the second time this year. It gives an opportunity for us to bring in speakers that have timely insights to provide, but also to provide an opportunity for papers to be submitted and presented on behalf of the community. So it's sponsored by ourselves, the CCD-COE, and IEEE to get the technical co-sponsor of one of the largest professional organizations in the computer electronics space. This year we'll have General Milley speaking and General Nakasone speaking on the first morning, which is going to give us an excellent opportunity for hopefully an emptying of the Pentagon for the morning, so that people can come over here to the Ronald Reagan Building and hear the chief speak, hear General Nakasone speak about where we're going with cyber. But we've also got some great other speakers that are lined up in that morning. We've got Dr. Brumley from Carnegie Mellon University, who is the winner of the DARPA Grand Challenge. He's going to talk about the way forward for automated hacking and artificial intelligence. And so by putting that in one highly impactful first morning, we hope to get quite a few people that will come out that wouldn't otherwise be interested in cyber. Because if you get a chance to hear the chief speak, that's always worth doing. And then we will follow up with, we've got a day and a half of really outstanding content that I think once people come, they won't want to leave, but it's going to be an outstanding opportunity. So we hope that we have all of you get a chance to come here. So what I've highlighted here are some of the artifacts of our work, some of the things that we've been doing. And one of the things that is crucial is about what is the research areas that we're working on, because what are the things that we're working on to try to figure out and present things in this environment. we want to get other academics working, but we want to also be pushing to come up with what we are working on. So one of the things that we're working on is in conjunction with TRADOC and with Army Cyber on multi-domain battle and trying to think through how are we going to go from the concept towards doctrine. Writing the doctrine will be the role of Fort Gordon, but really what are the questions that we need to answer today when we're looking at multi-domain battle with regard to information operations and the information environment, the electromagnetic spectrum, as well as with what we're trying to do in the cyber domain. We're also working on data and the future of data centers, trying to figure out how we are going to have access to the data that we need in the future. And we're also continue to do work on talent management, trying to figure out how we find, educate, retain, create career paths that will allow our community to be the very best that it can be going forward. But I thank you very much for coming here to our Cyber Pavilion, and I have a few minutes to offer it up for any questions. If there's any questions before we go on to our next speaker. Yeah.
How do you, where do you get your priorities from, sir? So it sounds like you guys do a lot of great work. And obviously someone within ACI is laying out, hey, here's our top 10 items we want to work over the next fiscal year. Where do you get those priorities from? How much of those are external and how much of those are self-generated?
Yeah, so part of my job as the director is to be tied into the community and to take what the community is articulating as priorities and then see how they map onto the space that we're doing with regard to research. Because we have a slightly different mission than either the Army Cyber Command or the Cyber Center of Excellence, but we have to be working with those leaders to try to figure out what our priorities are. So I work with Deimos CY as the G3 or the G39 now, I guess we're referring to Deimos CY as G39. I work with General Frost on what her priorities are and where she thinks research would be going, and so we are working throughout the year with those ideas. We also work with the Superintendent, General Caslin. General Caslin, as my boss, as he's going around the Army, he gets a chance to talk with senior leaders to find out what are some of their interests with their cyber. And then we also have on our staff General Hernandez, who is the first commander of Cyber Command, and he is constantly working within the senior leader space of the cyber community to figure out what they believe are the research topics. So between that and the senior leaders that I have at West Point, we come up with ideas on what we have for priorities. We got a chance to participate in the Army Senior Leaders Week that General Nakasone held, and we present the work on what we're presenting, work with General McGee and the other general officers within the Army Cyber Command to try to ensure that the things that we're looking at are the things that are of interest to them. Right now, one of the key things for a lot of the Army is as we're trying to work this balance of the Pacific and Europe. And so we try to help and try to find out how could we possibly work in the future to help solve some of those issues. Because we're not going to solve any of the cyber problems for Korea in the next 4 months, clearly. But at the same time, we can take a look at how we can partner with the academic institutions that we have, how we can work better with our Australian or New Zealand compatriots going forward. So we try to look at some of the priorities that our partners have that are within the cyber community, and then how we can uniquely impact that. Okay, thank you very much.